So I'm going to talk about initiation and the great individual, and we'll also discuss the not so great individual as well. I'm Angel Miller. I'm the author of The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality, Craftsman, Warrior, Magician by Inner Traditions, and the upcoming Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos, which will be released in November 2021. Now, in the last video, I was mentioning how things have changed in society from it being very restrictive and really the ethos being do your duty to the country or to the, let's say, the hierarchy, or however we might want to describe it. And now today, the ethos being be yourself, be uniquely you, don't be pigeonholed by ideas of the past. You just be you. You're beautiful as you are. It's wonderful that you're uniquely you. And like a lot in Western society, from a certain perspective, it can't really be criticized. And the problem, I think, is that Western society often takes the realization that comes with mastery and applies it to the most basic level. So, of course, it is absolutely true that at a certain point when you achieve mastery in a field, you are going to be uniquely you, because you will have transcended your teachings or what you learned. You will have transcended your apprenticeship, whether that's in the fine arts or whether that's in a martial art or something completely different. At a certain point, of course, you're going to break the rules, abandon the rules. You're going to be you, or whatever manifests through you will be unique, and people will refer to it as your style. But this is not really very helpful at the beginning stages of anything. Being uniquely you, if you want to do something substantial, is going to be a hindrance. And while this might be, in a sense, a kind of ultimate aim to be oneself through learning some kind of art or tradition, approaching it from this perspective at the beginning often leads to a kind of plebeianism, a kind of inability to actually really express oneself, and instead it's merely a kind of consumerism where let's say the lower individual, to express him or herself, quote unquote, will merely adopt some fashion, adopt some kind of style of clothing or style of speaking, or use certain words that are in vogue, have a certain haircut, or will consume certain products which are deemed to be, for example, ethical, or have been endorsed by certain political organizations, or are favorably viewed in the correct media, and so on. And instead of becoming oneself, this kind of lower individual has not pushed themselves through a tradition, through all the difficulties of a tradition. And we're talking maybe physical difficulties in the martial arts, but this would also imply most certainly emotional difficulties, mental difficulties, even spiritual difficulties, which must be surmounted. The individual that says, I know I'm just going to be myself, ends up becoming a kind of pastiche, a kind of amalgamation of different things and ideas, all of which he or she is not. So it looks kind of rebellious. There's usually numerous other kind of copies of this individual, or this individual is a copy of other individuals who see themselves as breaking out of the system and so on, but are actually fully 100% immersed in the system. The system today, so far as there is a system, is based on the idea that you consume to be you. You consume certain products to express you. this is not really expressing you at all. And this is the lower individual, I think we can say, and it's very much related to the ego rather than to the true self. So to be blunt, while I agree with the idea of becoming oneself and fully endorse this, I believe that much of the rhetoric around it, which we can find on daytime talk shows, media, television advertisements, magazine advertisements, and so on, are not really aimed at encouraging you to be yourself, but are really aimed at getting you to consume particular products rather than other products. And it is, in effect, a kind of trap. To be you, you have to pursue some kind of tradition in a very loose sense of the word. If you pursue a martial art with seriousness for 10 years, maybe even 5 years, you will discover who you are inside. Absolutely. If you pursue painting for a number of years with seriousness, you will find out things about yourself. If you write for a number of years, you will find out who you really are. You will discover all kinds of things about you that you would never have thought of before, because you will be forced to reflect on yourself and on what you really believe. So the only way to become a true individual, I would say the great individual, is to pursue some course of action with seriousness. Now, this idea that there is a lower individual and a higher individual is something that we find in different spiritual traditions, different esoteric traditions, and it is something, I think, that is can come to thinkers as an insight without even necessarily any reference to these traditions. There's a story that the author Colin Wilson has related, and for those who don't know, Colin Wilson is mostly known as an author on the occult and related subjects, although he actually was catapulted to fame as a young man with his book The Outsider, which really pegged him as a kind of new young British intellectual, one of the so-called angry young men, but certainly a very interesting thinker, very prolific author. And when he was a really young man, maybe even a child, you could say, around the age of 16, Colin Wilson decided to commit suicide. And to cut a long story short, he was just about to go through with the axe when he had this profound insight that there were actually two Colin Wilsons. And there was the Colin Wilson that he didn't like, that didn't seem to be of any value to him, who didn't seem to be in any way kind of able to contribute to the world or have anything profound to say. And then there was a second Colin Wilson. And this second Colin Wilson, in a sense, existed in the future. That was the Colin Wilson that he was going to become, the Colin Wilson who would author 100 books or whatever it may be. And at that moment he realized that if he did kill himself, that he would also kill this future Colin Wilson, the higher self, the true self, the great individual that he could and was destined to become. Now, since we've mentioned the occult, let's just briefly talk about the Western esoteric tradition, quote unquote. Now, people will become involved in this sort of tradition, alternative spirituality, sort of hermetically related spiritual organizations or orders, and so on. In a sense, very often as a kind of religious substitute, or at least that's what it becomes. It becomes a kind of belief system in which the individual very much focuses on the meaning of this symbol related to another symbol, which is related to another symbol, and so on. And my feeling often is that people become stuck in the esoteric tradition. They can't really break through it. And I think what is missing here is a sense of the heroic. And I know that's a term that's generally associated with men, but I'm not excluding women from this at all. There have been heroic women. We can think, for example, of Joan of Arc, a 15-year-old girl who repelled the British forces when it seemed absolutely impossible that this could ever be done. And she had no military training, of course, but she had a lot of inspiration and divine inspiration, we could even say. But this sort of heroic attitude is very much missing from the esoteric, from the world of alternative spirituality. And it may be partly because often this kind of world appeals to people as a kind of retreat from the world, that the world is unpleasant, it's grimy, it's dangerous, it's dirty, it's demanding, it wants our time, and maybe we're not being paid enough. It's a struggle, and it's a struggle for most people. It really is. But this world offers a kind of escapism, a kind of retreat, when it should really be a profound mirror to look into and see what's wrong with oneself and what can be changed and what can be improved and how we can improve ourselves and develop ourselves in all kinds of ways, mental, physical, spiritual, and so on. But I think the nature of esotericism is that people get very hooked into especially symbols, but also techniques, and are always trying out a new symbol, a new technique, trying this tradition, then that tradition, which becomes, in a sense, very much reflective of let's say materialistic society, exoteric society, the world at large, where perhaps a sort of middle class individual will be trying out Thai food one night and then another restaurant another night, this kind of entertainment one night, some other kind of entertainment another night, this sort of pick and mix approach to life, where everything is sampled, but nothing is especially serious, and there's no kind of dedication to anything. And this can include relationships, of course, especially in larger cities where there are always possibilities to trade up, or however it might be expressed, and so you find this reflected in the world of the esoteric, which is supposed to be the most sort of profound and deep relationship with the divine, however that might be conceived. And I would say that the esoteric is not something that one should enter into as a kind of religious substitute, as a kind of belief system, that instead it is something that one should go through. One should go through the esoteric if one is inclined to enter it. Rather in the same way that one might go through a martial art or go through an artistic tradition as an artist, that the aim, let's say, of an artist should not be to become a cubist painter or an impressionist painter. It should be to found a movement that is the modern equivalent of cubism, or to found a movement that is the modern equivalent of impressionism. Or a martial artist might study and practice one martial art and will then develop his own style, which might overcome some of the limitations of the style that he has practiced diligently for several years, and then will launch his own style, his own school. And this, of course, is how we get all of these different styles of, for example, Kung Fu. So you have, tiger style, you have monkey style, crane style, black dragon, and so on. So the idea should not be to enter something, but to go through it, to develop one's own style, to develop one's own uniqueness through the system, through the tradition, as it were, through the structure. And the structure, and going through it, should put the individual in touch with himself or in touch with herself, so that the individual experiences his or her own true nature, the true self, the great individual, the higher self. This is the point of the esoteric. It is also the point of martial arts, of art, and so on. And so we cannot consume all of these different things. We cannot approach life as a kind of pick and mix. I like Thai food tonight, but I'm going to have Italian tomorrow. I like this spiritual tradition today, let's say Kabbalah, but tomorrow I like Wicca or whatever it may be, or I like esoteric Christianity today, but I like something totally different tomorrow, and I don't know how they're integrated. Of course, yes, these different schools or different traditions can over time become integrated in different ways, and of course there's always been overlap and influence between cultures. Even cultures that were at war would still in some different ways would influence each other as they came into this sort of antagonistic contacts, and it may be said perhaps that a time has gone by, often the tribes or the generals or the warlords that were at war would often have a respect for the opposition, depending on how they behaved, of course, if they seemed to behave in a way that was chivalrous. So what does that mean, summing up? Well, I think very simply it means don't be lulled into this kind of hypnotic rhetoric of just be you, just be yourself. Instead, although the message seems to be a good one, to be you, you cannot be you by consuming. You cannot be you by emulating and taking on the rhetoric of other people or of this movement or that movement. You cannot become you by emulating other people, by repeating things, by looking like other people, by thinking like other people. The only way to become you, the only way to become the great individual is to go through something, to go through a tradition, a system, a school, some kind of field, some kind of skill, some kind of art, and to come out the other side. But coming out the other side is what's important. Of course, at first, the art, the tradition will mold you. And then once you've achieved a certain degree of mastery, you will mold it. And at a certain point, what you bring about will be authentically you. You will become more you by going through these things than you ever could be by simply adopting a bit of this and a bit of that and never really facing yourself. So that probably wraps it up for today. Check out the website, angelmillar.com, link below. I'm posting regularly lots of articles on self-development, spirituality, aspects of the esoteric, the mind, consciousness, hypnosis, and so on. And I think you'll find a lot of it very helpful if you are on some kind of self-development path. Well, for today, thanks very much, and I will speak to you again soon.